Welcome to Stories from the Front. Take a second to like, subscribe, and activate notifications. The desert has a unique way of marking our souls. Steve Mathers, a former patrolman with the 75th Rangers, and those 18 hours in Operation Desert Storm in 1991 turned a routine mission into a fight for survival. The Iraqi desert holds secrets that some of us still carry. Our unit consisted of 6 men. Me, Sergeant Paul Martinez, our team leader, communications specialist Mark Wilson, our sniper Frank Cooper, combat medic David Chun, and our navigator Bill Harris. We were a cohesive team, trained for special operations in hostile territory. The mission began at 0300 hours on February 15th. Our objective was to assess the positions of Iraqi forces about 50 kilometers north of Kuwait City. Intelligence reports indicated the movement of armored vehicles in that area, and we needed to confirm this information. The desert at night has a treacherous beauty. The silence is absolute, except for the occasional breath of wind in the dunes. We moved like ghosts, using state-of-the-art night vision equipment. The temperature had dropped to around 10 degrees Celsius, typical of desert nights. Everything seemed normal during the first 2 hours of operation. Martinez led our wedge formation while I covered the right flank. That's when Harris, always precise in his navigation, noticed something strange in the patterns of the dunes in front of us. Unnatural terrain movement, he whispered over the radio. 3 dots, coordinates 270. At first, I thought they were just shadows created by the moonlight, but years of training made me trust Harris's instinct. Martinez signaled for us to dock, and that's when we heard the first shot. The sound cut through the desert silence like thunder, followed by the distinctive hiss of bullets whizzing over our heads. In a matter of seconds, we found ourselves surrounded by Iraqi forces who had camouflaged themselves perfectly in the dunes. Contact at 0500 hours, I radioed to command. Hostile force estimated at plus platoon, requesting immediate support. The reply was broken. Storm, impossible return. 6 hours. A sandstorm was approaching, preventing any possibility of immediate air rescue. We were alone. Martinez quickly ordered us to take up defensive positions in a natural depression in the terrain. Cooper, our sniper, had already eliminated 3 targets with his characteristic precision. Chun prepared the medical equipment, anticipating what was to come. The next few hours turned into a nightmare of crossfire, grenade explosions, and the constant threat of being flanked. The deafening sound of gunfire mixed with shouts in Arabic and the increasing howl of the wind. Wilson kept in constant contact with command, even though communications were hampered by the approaching storm. Base, Echo Team, requesting artillery support at the coordinates. A nearby explosion interrupted his transmission, throwing sand and shrapnel in our direction. Jin immediately rushed to attend to Harris, who had been hit by fragments in his left arm. Keep pressure here, Jin instructed, applying a makeshift tourniquet. Ammunition, 3 magazines, I replied, checking my equipment. Cooper, 2 magazines for the rifle. A grenade, he replied, without taking his eyes off the scope. Martinez reorganized our position, creating a more compact defensive perimeter. The sandstorm was starting to arrive, drastically reducing our visibility. Paradoxically, this offered us both protection and additional danger. They'll try to use the storm as cover, Martinez warned. Keep your eyes open and save your ammunition. Shoot only with visual confirmation. The wind increased, bringing with it a curtain of fine sand that seeped into every small opening in our equipment. The sound of gunfire diminished, but the tension only increased. We knew the enemy was out there, waiting, planning. Chun finished stabilizing Harris and returned to his combat position. Wilson was still trying to establish clear communication with command, but the storm was increasingly interfering with the signals. If we don't get support soon, whispered Cooper, we're going to have to consider evasion options. Martinez shook his head. Negative. Harris is injured and moving us slower. Besides, we don't have enough cover for a safe retreat. We'll hold position and survive this storm. The sand was now falling like rain, reducing our visibility to less than 10 meters. The sound of the wind masked any enemy movement, forcing us to rely more on instinct than training. That's when I realized that this was going to be one of the longest nights of our lives. A battle not only against the enemy, but against the elements, the weather, and our own fears. And that was just the first hour of a nightmare that would last much longer than any of us could have imagined. The sandstorm continued to intensify, turning our defensive position into a natural isolation chamber. The wind carried not only sand, but also the distant screams of Iraqi soldiers, creating a macabre symphony that penetrated our minds. Harris, still fighting the pain from his arm wound, remained conscious and alert. Chen had done an excellent job with the makeshift tourniquet, but we all knew that we needed medical evacuation in the next few hours. Infection in the desert was as lethal a threat as enemy bullets. "Movement at 2 o'clock, whispered Cooper, his eyes still glued to the rifle scope. Through the curtain of sand, shadows moved like specters. Martinez signaled us to hold position, saving ammunition for confirmed targets. Wilson continued to struggle with the radio, trying to establish contact with command. Base Echo Team, repeat, position surrounded. Static was our only response, interspersed with occasional bursts of interference. That's when I noticed a pattern in the enemy's movements. "Sarg, they're trying to flank us from the east," warned Martinez. "They're using the storm as cover for a pincer movement." Martinez processed the information quickly. "Cooper, change position. Cover the eastern sector. Mathers, you, and Shun reinforce the west. They'll try to divide our attention." The change of position was executed with methodical precision, the result of countless hours of training. As we moved, a burst of automatic fire cut through the air above our heads. Cooper responded with 2 precise shots. 2 muffled shouts confirmed as hits. "Critical ammunition," Chen reported, checking his magazine. 2 full magazines. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Not only was our ammunition running out, but the sandstorm was starting to affect our equipment. The fine sand was seeping into the moving parts of our weapons, increasing the risk of failure at the most critical moment. Base, this is Team Echo," Wilson tried again. "We need urgent extraction. We got a man down, and we're under heavy fire." This time, we managed to pick up fragments of a response. "Echo, hold position, support, 3 hours." Martinez quickly gathered us for an impromptu briefing. "Listen, we have to hold for another 3 hours. Command will try an extraction window when the storm subsides. Until then, we need to be smart with our ammunition and resources." A metallic sound caught our attention, a grenade rolling towards us. "Grenade!" I shouted, diving down to cover Harris. The explosion shook our position, throwing more sand into the already saturated air. "Everyone okay?" asked Martinez, quickly checking the team. We confirmed our situation, but the attack had a purpose beyond trying to eliminate us. It was a test of our position and our response. The Iraqis were systematically mapping our defense. "They're going to try something bigger," muttered Cooper, always analytical. "That grenade was just to make us reveal our positions." Chen finished checking Harris's wound. "The bleeding is under control, but he needs antibiotics. The sand isn't helping." The next few hours turned into a deadly game of patience and nerves. The attacks came in calculated waves, testing different sectors of our defense. Each burst of fire we answered revealed more about our positions and available ammunition. Wilson finally managed to establish clearer contact with command. "Echo, prepare for artillery support coordinates. Mark position with infrared beacon." It was risky to use the beacon. It would reveal our exact position, but we needed that artillery support. Martinez made the decision. Wilson coordinates. Cooper, maximum cover. Chun, prepare Harris for rapid movement, if necessary. I positioned myself to cover the northern sector, while Martinez coordinated the rest of the team. The sound of the storm was beginning to diminish slightly, but visibility was still poor. That's when we noticed a new pattern of movement in the dunes. Vehicles identified Cooper. 2, no, 3 BMPs approaching from the northeast sector. The situation had escalated dramatically. Armored personnel carriers meant that the enemy was tired of playing games. They were coming to finish the siege and eliminate us once and for all. "Wilson, we need that artillery now," ordered Martinez, his voice retaining the professional calm I had always admired in him. The sound of the BMP's engines grew, mingling with the decreasing howl of the storm. We were about to face a mechanized force with little ammunition and a wounded man. The next decisions would determine whether we would survive to see the next sunrise in the Iraqi desert. The arrival of the BMPs completely changed the dynamics of combat. The roar of the engines grew, while the sandstorm began to subside. Our defensive position, which until then had protected us against infantry, now seemed fragile in the face of the armored vehicle's firepower. "Beacon ready," Wilson reported, holding up the device that would mark our position for artillery support. Martinez was mentally calculating the perfect timing. Too early would alert the enemy, too late would be our death sentence. Cooper kept his rifle aimed, even though he knew his ammunition would be useless against the armor. 3 BMPs, 2 infantry squads at least, he reported. They're moving in classic pincer formation. Harris, still conscious despite the pain, muttered something about the movement patterns he had identified earlier. Chin checked his vital signs once more, worried about the possibility of infection. "Wilson, get ready," Martinez ordered. "When I give the signal, I want those coordinates transmitted with surgical precision. No mistakes." The metallic sound of the BMP's caterpillars grew louder. We could feel the vibration in the sandy soil. My mind briefly went back to the training at Fort Benning. Nothing had really prepared us for facing armored vehicles with limited ammunition. Visual contact confirmed, I whispered, watching the first BMP emerge from the curtain of sand. 300 meters, fast approaching. Martinez waited until just the right moment, when the vehicles were close enough not to have time to retreat, but still far enough away not to crush us instantly. "Now, Wilson," the infrared beacon cut through the air, marking our position for the artillery batteries. Wilson transmitted the coordinates with the calm of a veteran, even under the immense pressure of the moment. "Echo to base, coordinates transmitted. Danger close. I repeat, danger close." The next few seconds seemed like an eternity. The BMPs kept advancing, their heavy machine guns beginning to sweep over our position. Martinez ordered us to remain absolutely still. Any movement would only draw more fire. Then the sky roared. The first artillery shell hit precisely between 2 BMPs, launching a column of fire and debris into the air. The impact was so violent that we felt the shockwave in our bones. More shells began to fall, creating an artificial hell in the night desert. "Keep your heads down," shouted Martinez, as the artillery continued its deadly work. One of the BMPs took a direct hit, turning into a fireball that lit up the night. The enemy infantry, taken by surprise, scattered in panic. The second BMP tried to retreat, but another direct hit immobilized it. "Movement at 9 o'clock, warned Cooper, spotting enemy soldiers trying to flank our position during the bombardment. Chun and I opened coordinated fire, forcing them to retreat. Harris, although wounded, managed to take out 2 soldiers who were dangerously close to our position. The bombardment lasted only 3 minutes, but it completely transformed the battlefield. When the dust settled, 2 BMPs had been destroyed, and the third had retreated beyond our visual range. "Echo to base, effective impact on target," Wilson transmitted, requesting secondary sweep, north sector. Martinez took advantage of the momentary pause to reorganize our defense. "Cooper, confirm eliminations. Chun, status on Harris?" "Stable, but he needs that evacuation," replied Chun, changing the bandage on Harris's arm. I watched the horizon through my night vision equipment, looking for signs of a counterattack. The sandstorm had subsided considerably, improving our visibility, but also making us easier targets. "Base to Echo," the radio crackled. "Extraction cooked always. ETA 20 minutes. Maintain secure perimeter." Those would be the longest 20 minutes of our lives. The enemy had suffered significant losses, but we still had to assume that they were regrouping for another attack. "MO?" Martinez asked, doing a quick check. "Last magazine," replied Cooper. 2 magazines, I informed him. 1.5, said Chun. Wilson nodded, indicating his last one too. Martinez nodded, absorbing the information. "Save every shot. Only confirmed targets. We need to hold out until the extraction arrives. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer the tense silence of expectation, but the heavy silence that follows great battles. The air smelled of burnt metal, cordite, and diesel. Harris broke the silence with a weak laugh. You know what's ironic? Today is my birthday. Chun smiled, checking his vital signs again. Then let's make sure we get you out of here for a proper celebration. The distant sound of rotors was beginning to make itself felt, but we still had to survive the next few minutes. The enemy would surely hear the helicopters approaching too, and this would be their last chance to eliminate us. The sound of the helicopter's rotors approaching should have been comforting, but my years of experience told me that the final moments of an operation are often the most lethal. The Iraqis knew it was their last chance to eliminate us before extraction. Visual contact, warned Cooper. Infantry approaching from 3 directions. They're using the wreckage of the BMPs as cover. Martinez quickly redeployed our defensive positions. With ammunition running low, every shot had to count. Harris, even wounded, insisted on keeping his weapon ready, refusing to be dead weight for the team. Base to Echo, the radio crackled. 2 Black Hawks on final approach. Prepare landing zone. Estimated time, 5 minutes. Wilson marked our position with a chemical flare, visible only through night vision equipment. The enemy stepped up their attack, realizing that time was running out. Mathers, Chun, cover the southern sector, ordered Martinez. Cooper, keep those bastards away from the northern perimeter. Wilson, keep in touch with the extraction. A burst of automatic fire passed dangerously close to my position. I responded with 2 precise shots, watching a shadow fall into the darkness. Chun, next to me, eliminated another attacker who was trying to crawl closer. Last magazine, I warned, feeling the weight of reality in my words. The sound of the helicopters was getting louder, but it was also attracting more enemy fire. A nearby explosion indicated that they still had grenades. Harris cried out in pain as the impact shook our position, partially reopening his wound. "Whole formation," shouted Martinez over the chaos. "Don't let them close in." Cooper executed 2 perfect shots in quick succession, taking out snipers trying to establish a position on one of the destroyed BMPs. His rifle spoke twice more before he announced, "Out of ammo." The helicopters finally appeared, their rotors slicing through the night air like giant blades. The first Black Hawk began its approach, facing sporadic anti-aircraft fire. "First aircraft on final approach," Wilson transmitted. "We need to clear that landing zone." Martinez organized our withdrawal in phases. Cooper and Harris first. Chun, prepare the patient for movement. Mathers and Wilson, maximum suppression. Let's make this happen. The first Black Hawk landed amid a storm of sand and fire. Its side gunners responded to enemy fire with their miniguns, the characteristic sound echoing across the desert. "Now," shouted Martinez. Chin and Cooper loaded Harris into the helicopter, while Wilson and I kept up the suppressive fire. My last magazine was half gone when I saw more movement in the dunes. "RPG," I warned, but it was too late. The projectile whizzed over our heads, missing the Black Hawk by meters. The pilot remained remarkably cool-blooded, staying in position while the first wave of the team boarded. Second Black Hawk on approach, Wilson informed us. 1 minute. Martinez coordinated the second phase of the extraction. "Wilson, you're next." "Mathers, cover the eastern sector." "I'll hold the west." The second helicopter touched the ground as my last magazine ran dry. I switched to my secondary pistol, aware that I only had 8 shots left. "Mathers, Martinez, move," shouted Wilson from inside the first Black Hawk. We ran in a zigzag pattern to the aircraft, while the gunners kept the enemy suppressed. Martinez pushed me inside first, covering our retreat with his last shells. "All aboard," confirmed the crew chief. Taking off, the 2 Black Hawks lifted off in perfect coordination, their turbines roaring against the desert night. Shots continued to bounce off the fuselage, but we were finally getting out of that hell. I looked at my teammates, all exhausted, covered in sand and blood. Harris smiled faintly as Chun rechecked his bandages. Cooper had closed his eyes, his hands still clutching the empty rifle. Wilson finally put down the radio, allowing himself a moment of relief. Martinez met my gaze and nodded slightly. We didn't need words to express how we felt. We had survived one of the longest nights of our lives, and every man on that aircraft was living proof of the power of unity and training. As the Iraqi desert disappeared beneath us, I realized that this mission had changed us forever. We were no longer just a reconnaissance unit. We were brothers forged in the heat of combat, united by an experience that few could understand. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, marking the end of our ordeal. But the memories of that night in the desert would remain with us forever, a silent testament to the cost and value of survival. In the helicopter, as we flew away from the battlefield, my mind was still processing the events of the last 18 hours. The rhythmic sound of the rotors provided a strange contrast to the chaos we had left behind. Harris had finally been given morphine and was sleeping, his expression more relaxed for the first time since his injury. Base reports arrival in 20 minutes, Wilson transmitted, his voice hoarse from coordinating communications throughout the night. Martinez nodded silently, his eyes still vigilant, as if he expected danger to follow us even in the heights. Jim methodically checked each member of the team, looking for injuries that might have gone unnoticed in the heat of battle. Cooper kept his empty rifle resting between his knees, his fingers occasionally caressing the butt like a talisman. "Do you know," I began, breaking the tense silence, "that we've just set some kind of record? 18 hours under enemy fire, with no fatal casualties." Martinez finally allowed himself a small smile. "Don't push your luck, Mathers. We're not home yet." The light of dawn was beginning to reveal the true extent of our condition. Our uniforms were covered in dried blood and sand, some showing rips from shrapnel and bullets that had passed too close. The equipment was in an even worse state, guns clogged with sand, radios damaged, canteens empty. "Remember," Martinez continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, "when we land, we follow protocol. Full debriefing, medical assessment, then rest. No extensions." I nodded, knowing he was right, but I also knew that rest wouldn't come easily. I could already feel the memories crystallizing in my mind. The sound of the explosions, the shouts in Arabic, the smell of burning fuel from the destroyed BMPs. Wilson interrupted my thoughts. "Base reports clear weather for landing. Medical team standing by on the perimeter." The helicopter began its final descent, and for the first time, I could see our forward base emerging from the desert. It looked surreal, organized structures, vehicles in formation, personnel moving with purpose. A completely different world from the chaos we had faced. "Prepare for landing," the pilot announced over the intercom. As the wheels touched the ground, a medical team was already rushing towards us. Harris was the first to be removed, Chin accompanying him to ensure the proper transition of care. The rest of us disembarked slowly, our muscles protesting after hours of constant tension. Colonel Bradford was waiting for us in the landing area, his face a mask of professional concern. "Good work, Rangers. Preliminary report in 30 minutes. Then you'll be cleared for full medical assessment." "Permission to escort Harris to the infirmary first, sir," Martinez requested. Bradford nodded, understanding. "Granted." The rest of the team, "Follow me." As we walked to the command center, I noticed how unreal each step seemed. The transition from intense combat to the organized routine of the base was almost disturbing in its normality. Other soldiers watched us pass, their gazes a mixture of respect and curiosity. In the briefing room, we recounted the events of the night before. Each member of the team contributed their perspective, creating a complete picture of the operation. The intelligence officers took notes frantically, occasionally interrupting to ask for clarification on enemy positions or tactics used. "Destruction of BMPs confirmed by aerial reconnaissance," reported one of the officers. "Initial estimate of enemy casualties between 30 and 40 fighters." Numbers? They always reduce everything to numbers, but sitting there, still covered in the dust of combat, I knew that the true cost couldn't be quantified. I saw it in the eyes of my comrades. The weight of the decisions made, the lives taken, the moments of doubt and fear overcome. After the debriefing, we were finally released to the infirmary. Harris was already in a stable condition, scheduled for medical evacuation as soon as possible. Chin had done an exceptional job keeping him alive during those long hours. "You know," said Cooper as we waited our turn for the medical examination, "I don't think I'll ever complain about training again. Every damn repetition exercise was worth it last night." Wilson laughed softly. "Speak for yourself. I still intend to complain about the weight of the communications equipment. It was a necessary moment of lightness, but we all knew that the next few nights would be difficult. Combat leaves marks that go beyond physical wounds, invisible scars that we carry forever. 30 years have passed since that night in the Iraqi desert, but the memories remain as vivid as the moment I lived them. Sitting here, recounting these events, I realized that each of us carried a different piece of that hell with us. Harris survived and made a full recovery from his arm injury. Although he left military service 2 years later, he became a history teacher at a high school in Colorado, where he occasionally shares his experience with students interested in serving. Chun continued in medicine, specializing in combat trauma. His work has saved hundreds of lives in conflict zones around the world. Whenever we meet, he mentions how that night shaped his approach to treating wounded soldiers. Cooper, our sniper, was never the same after that mission. The precision he demonstrated that night haunted him in unexpected ways. He retired from active service 5 years later, but continues to train new snipers, passing on not only technique, but also the moral lessons he learned in the desert. Wilson developed an obsessive interest in communications after our experience. He worked on developing more efficient radio systems for combat in extreme conditions, determined to ensure that no other team faced the communication problems we had. Martinez remained in the Army for another 15 years, reaching the rank of colonel. His leadership that night became a case study in military academies, an example of how to maintain team cohesion under extreme pressure. As for me, I spent years trying to process everything that had happened. Nightmares were frequent at first. Dreams with a sandstorm never ended, where the helicopters never arrived, where we didn't all survive. The sound of the BMPs approaching still echoes in my mind during particularly difficult nights. We meet regularly, all 6 of us, in a small bar in Fort Benning. It's our particular tradition, religiously maintained over the decades. We drink, we reminisce, and sometimes we cry for those who didn't have our luck on other missions in other wars. During our last meeting, Harris brought something interesting, an Iraqi newspaper article from 1991, which he had managed to translate. The article briefly mentioned that night's confrontation from their point of view. It described how a small American unit had inflicted heavy casualties on their forces, specifically mentioning the destruction of the BMPs as a decisive moment that affected the morale of the troops in the region. "We were legends to them," Harris said, laughing humorlessly. "Ghosts in the storm that destroyed 3 armored vehicles and killed dozens of their men." The reality, as always, was more complex. We weren't legends or heroes. We were just 6 men fighting to survive, relying on training, luck, and each other. True heroism, I've learned, is not in the grand gestures or the stories others tell, but in the small moments of courage and loyalty. Martinez raised his glass at our last meeting. "To the longest night," he said, using the toast that has become our tradition. "To the longest night," we replied in unison. Today, when young recruits ask me about the war, about what it was really like, I hesitate. How can I explain the paralyzing fear that precedes every decision in combat? How do you describe the sound of a sandstorm mixed with enemy fire? How do I convey the indescribable relief of seeing your comrades survive against all odds? Instead, I talk about confidence, about how 6 different men with distinct histories and personalities became a perfectly synchronized unit when necessary, about how every decision, every shot, every move was part of a collective effort bigger than ourselves. War marks us in ways we never expect. It's not just the physical scars or the nightmares. It's how we see the world afterwards, how we value every moment of peace, how we understand the true meaning of brotherhood. 30 years later, I still carry the weight of that night in the desert, but I also carry the pride of having served alongside extraordinary men of having faced the impossible and survived to tell the story. A story not of glory or heroism, but of persistence, loyalty, and the incredible human capacity to overcome adversity when united by a common purpose. The Iraqi desert may be thousands of kilometers away, but its lessons remain alive in each of us. In every meeting, every toast, every story shared, we relive not only the terror of that night, but also the strength we found in each other. And perhaps that is the true lesson of war, that our humanity, our ability to stand together even in the darkest moments, is our greatest strength. A lesson written not with ink, but with blood, sweat, and desert sand, preserved in the memories of those who lived to tell it.